Chosen one, there are seasons in life that feel unusually quiet, almost as if the world around you has slowly stepped back. Conversations that once filled your days become less frequent. Invitations that once appeared naturally begin disappearing without explanation. Relationships that once felt familiar begin fading into distance, not necessarily through conflict, but through a subtle shift that you cannot easily describe. The environments that once felt comfortable suddenly feel different, as though something inside you no longer fits the same patterns. In these moments, it is easy to interpret the experience as rejection. The silence can feel like abandonment. The distance can feel like punishment. You may begin wondering if something went wrong, if you made a mistake that pushed people away, or if the path you are walking somehow caused you to lose the connection you once had with the world around you.
Yet many chosen ones eventually discover that this quiet season is not always the result of failure. Sometimes it is the beginning of selection. What appears to be isolation on the surface may actually be a period where God is carefully removing distractions, shifting your environment, and refining the direction of your life. Throughout Scripture, some of the most significant moments of preparation happened far away from the noise of the crowd. Moses spent years in the wilderness before he ever stood before Pharaoh to lead a nation out of captivity. During that long period of quiet shepherding, his life looked simple and even unnoticed. Yet those years were not wasted. They were shaping his patience, strengthening his resilience, and teaching him how to depend on God rather than the status he once held in Egypt. In the same way, isolation often becomes the space where transformation happens without the pressure of public attention. When life becomes quieter, the mind begins noticing things it once ignored. Without constant interaction, distractions lose their grip on your focus. The opinions of others no longer fill every corner of your thinking. Instead, something deeper begins happening inside your awareness. You start examining your life more honestly. The direction you are walking becomes clearer because fewer voices are competing for your attention. What once felt normal may begin to feel misaligned. Habits that once seemed harmless may reveal their long-term consequences. Relationships that once felt natural may suddenly appear built on expectations that no longer reflect who you are becoming. These realizations can feel uncomfortable because they force you to confront parts of your life that were previously hidden beneath the noise of daily interaction. But discomfort is often part of refinement. When God prepares someone for deeper purpose, He frequently begins by creating space between them and the environments that once shaped their identity. That space allows reflection to happen without constant influence from outside voices. In crowded environments, people often adopt the patterns around them without questioning whether those patterns truly align with their purpose. But when isolation arrives, the absence of those influences forces you to examine your direction with greater clarity. This process can feel confusing because it changes the rhythm of your life. Instead of constant activity, you experience quiet moments where your thoughts become louder than external distractions. Instead of being surrounded by familiar social patterns, you find yourself observing them from a distance. The shift may feel uncomfortable at first, yet it often becomes the environment where deeper alignment begins forming. Many chosen ones describe this period as a time when their understanding of life becomes sharper. They begin recognizing which relationships truly encouraged growth and which ones quietly drained their energy. They begin identifying habits that once distracted them from their purpose. They begin noticing the difference between temporary excitement and lasting direction. These realizations rarely happen while life is crowded with activity. They emerge during quieter seasons where reflection becomes possible. Isolation is not always permanent. It is often transitional. It creates the conditions necessary for clarity to develop before the next stage of life begins. What feels like distance from others may actually be the beginning of alignment with something greater than the environment you once belonged to. When God begins separating you from familiar patterns,
The process may look like rejection from the outside,
But in many cases, it is preparation taking place quietly,
away from the pressure of public attention. Yet once the noise of everyday life begins fading, something important begins happening inside that quiet space. The absence of constant distraction allows your focus to sharpen in ways that were impossible before. And that shift becomes the first reason seasons of isolation often appear in the life of someone who is being prepared for deeper purpose. Chosen one. Once the quiet season begins and the noise of everyday life slowly fades, something subtle but powerful starts changing in the way your mind and spirit operate. Isolation removes many of the distractions that once filled your attention. In normal circumstances, daily life is full of constant interaction. Conversations, messages, social obligations, and emotional exchanges occupy large portions of your time and energy.
None of these things are inherently wrong, but they create an environment where your attention is constantly divided. When the mind is always responding to external voices, it becomes difficult to hear the quieter guidance that often leads a person toward deeper purpose. Many people move through life surrounded by noise without realizing how much that noise influences their decisions. Opinions from friends, expectations from family, cultural pressures, and social comparison all compete for space inside the mind. Over time, these voices begin shaping choices in ways that feel natural because they are so common. People adopt habits, priorities, and even dreams that reflect the environment around them, rather than the direction God may actually be calling them toward. In crowded environments, it becomes easy to confuse activity with progress. Life feels full, conversations feel meaningful, and interactions create the impression of connection. Yet beneath that constant activity, deeper reflection rarely has the opportunity to occur. Isolation interrupts that cycle. When God allows distance from certain environments or relationships, the first noticeable change is often silence. Without constant conversation or social activity filling every moment, your thoughts begin becoming clearer. The absence of competing voices allows you to examine your life more honestly. Questions that once felt easy to ignore suddenly become difficult to avoid. Where am I actually going? Why am I pursuing the goals I have chosen? Are the relationships around me strengthening my purpose or distracting me from it? These questions require attention, and isolation provides the space necessary for that attention to exist. Quiet environments allow reflection that busy environments often prevent. When the noise of everyday life decreases, your mind begins organizing the experiences and patterns that once passed unnoticed. You start recognizing how certain habits influenced your decisions. You begin seeing how specific environments affected your mood, your focus, and even your faith. The process can feel uncomfortable because reflection often reveals truths that were hidden beneath distraction. Yet this discomfort is part of the clarity that isolation creates. Spiritual growth frequently begins with the removal of noise. When the mind is constantly responding to outside voices, it becomes difficult to recognize the guidance that comes from within. God often speaks through quiet conviction, subtle awareness, and patient reflection, rather than dramatic interruptions. But those forms of guidance require attention that many people rarely give themselves while surrounded by constant activity. When distractions are removed, that internal awareness becomes stronger. You begin noticing which thoughts bring peace and which ones create confusion. You recognize the difference between impulses driven by fear and decisions guided by wisdom. The quiet space allows you to reconnect with the deeper motivations that shaped your journey long before the noise of the world began influencing it. Many chosen ones discover that their spiritual clarity grows significantly during seasons of isolation. Prayer becomes more focused because there are fewer distractions competing for attention. Reflection becomes more honest because there are fewer external expectations influencing your thinking. The quiet environment
creates a space where your relationship with God can deepen in ways that crowded environments rarely allow. Instead of reacting constantly to the expectations of others, you begin listening more carefully to the direction unfolding within your life. This is why isolation is often described not as abandonment, but as alignment. God sometimes reduces external noise so you can hear internal guidance more clearly.
The process may feel uncomfortable at first because the silence exposes parts of your life that were previously hidden by activity. But within that silence, clarity begins forming. Decisions that once felt confusing become easier to evaluate. Priorities that once competed for your attention begin organizing themselves according to what truly matters. The absence of distraction allows the deeper structure of your life to become visible. What you once believed was rejection may reveal itself as protection from influences that were quietly pulling you away from your purpose. What you once interpreted as loneliness may become the environment where your focus strengthens. Isolation, in this sense, becomes less about separation and more about preparation. It creates the space necessary for you to hear the direction God is guiding you toward, without the constant interference of competing voices. Yet once the distractions fade and reflection begins revealing deeper truths about your life, another important transformation begins unfolding within that quiet space. Because isolation does more than simply remove noise. It also becomes the environment where your character and discernment are refined in ways that crowded seasons of life rarely allow. Chosen one, once the distractions of everyday life begin fading and the quiet space of isolation settles around you, another transformation gradually begins taking place beneath the surface. Isolation does more than create silence. It creates honesty. Without constant social interaction to distract the mind, you are forced to confront parts of yourself that were once easy to overlook. Habits, motivations, fears, and patterns that once blended into the rhythm of daily life suddenly become visible in a way they never were before. This is one of the reasons isolation can feel uncomfortable at first. When life is crowded with activity, people often define themselves through their roles within social environments. They see themselves through the feedback they receive from others, through the expectations they fulfill, and through the routines they follow every day. But when those environments fade away, something deeper begins to emerge. You are no longer surrounded by constant affirmation or criticism shaping how you see yourself. Instead, you are left with the quiet question of who you actually are when no one is watching. This question becomes the beginning of character refinement. Isolation creates an environment where appearances lose their importance and integrity becomes the focus. Without the pressure of maintaining a certain image in front of others, you begin examining your life with greater honesty. You recognize which habits are strengthening your future and which ones quietly undermine your growth. You begin noticing the difference between discipline that comes from conviction and discipline that only exists because other people expect it from you. These realizations are not always comfortable, but they are essential for transformation. Character grows strongest when it develops away from the pressure of performance. In public environments, people often behave according to the expectations around them. They adjust their actions to match the culture of the group they are part of. But when isolation removes those external expectations, the focus shifts inward. Your choices become guided less by appearance and more by conviction. This is where integrity begins strengthening in a meaningful way. The person you are becoming in private starts shaping the direction of your life more than the opinions of the crowd. At the same time, isolation sharpens your discernment about the people and influences that once surrounded you. Distance creates perspective. When you step away from constant interaction, you begin seeing relationships more clearly. Patterns that once seemed normal become easier to evaluate. You start recognizing which connections truly supported your growth and which ones quietly drained your energy. Some relationships that once felt essential may reveal themselves as based on convenience rather than genuine support.
Others may show signs of influence that you previously overlooked because you were too close to the situation to see it clearly. Discernment grows strongest when emotional distance allows honest evaluation. This process often leads to difficult realizations because recognizing misaligned influences can challenge the comfort of familiar relationships. Yet this clarity is necessary for growth. God does not refine someone's direction without also refining the influences surrounding them. The book of James describes this kind of refinement through the language of perseverance. Trials, challenges, and difficult seasons are described as producing endurance and maturity within a person's character. The process is rarely quick or easy, but it strengthens qualities that cannot develop through comfort alone. Isolation can function as one of those training environments. In the quiet space where distractions fade and reflection deepens, patience begins growing stronger. Emotional reactions become calmer because there is time to examine them rather than acting on impulse. Wisdom develops through observation and reflection instead of constant activity. Over time, these qualities reshape the way you interact with the world around you. You become less influenced by temporary emotions and more guided by thoughtful understanding. Decisions become slower, but more intentional. Reactions become calmer because your perspective is no longer controlled by immediate pressure.
The person emerging from this process often carries a stability that did not exist before the isolation began. What once felt like separation from the world reveals itself as preparation for engaging with it differently. This transformation also changes how you evaluate future relationships. Because your discernment has grown stronger, you begin recognizing the difference between connections that strengthen your purpose and those that distract from it. Instead of simply accepting every relationship that appears, you become more selective about the influences you allow into your life. This selectiveness is not arrogance. It is wisdom developed through experience. When you have seen how environments shape your direction, you begin choosing those environments more carefully. Isolation, therefore, becomes more than a season of distance. It becomes a training ground where patience, emotional stability, and discernment develop in ways that crowded seasons rarely allow. The quiet space forces growth that public environments often delay. Yet as your character deepens and your discernment sharpens, another important shift begins unfolding in the way relationships form around your life. Because once your direction becomes clearer and your values become stronger, the people who naturally align with that direction begin changing as well. Chosen one, after the quiet work of reflection and character refinement, begins shaping who you are becoming, another change gradually starts appearing in your life. Isolation does not only separate you from certain environments, it also prepares the space for new relationships to form. This shift rarely happens immediately. In fact, there is often a period where it feels as though your social world has become smaller than it once was. Conversations become fewer, familiar circles feel distant. People who once occupied large portions of your time slowly drift away, sometimes without any clear explanation. At first, this can feel like loss. It may even create the impression that isolation is permanent. Yet in many cases, this season is transitional rather than final. When God begins reshaping your direction, the relationships surrounding you often change as well. The reason for this change lies in alignment. As your values, discipline, and spiritual clarity grow, the qualities that once connected you to certain environments may no longer exist in the same way. Conversations that once felt natural may now feel draining or unproductive. Activities that once seemed exciting may now feel disconnected from the direction your life is moving toward. This shift does not necessarily mean those environments are entirely wrong. It simply means that the path you are walking may no longer fit comfortably within them. Growth changes compatibility. The more clearly you understand your purpose, the more carefully you begin choosing the influences that surround your life. Relationships that once existed through habit may fade because they were never built on deeper alignment. Without the shared patterns that once connected you, the interaction becomes less natural. This is one reason isolation can appear during periods of personal transformation. The distance
creates space for your life to realign before new connections appear. If every old environment remained exactly the same while you were changing internally, the pressure to maintain those patterns could easily slow or reverse your growth. Separation protects the transformation that is taking place. Proverbs describes this principle through the idea that the people we walk with influence the direction of our lives. When someone spends time with wise individuals, their thinking becomes sharper and their decisions become stronger. But when someone remains surrounded by influences that encourage distraction or compromise, their direction often reflects those patterns as well.
Preparation for the next stage of life sometimes requires stepping away from environments that cannot support the growth taking place within you. Isolation creates the breathing room necessary for that transition to occur. During this time, your expectations about relationships often begin shifting. Instead of focusing on quantity, you begin valuing alignment. You start recognizing that a few meaningful connections built on shared values can be far more powerful than a large number of relationships based on convenience or habit. This change in perspective alters the way you approach people in the future. You become more attentive to the character and direction of those you allow into your life. Instead of simply seeking companionship, you begin looking for relationships that strengthen your faith, your discipline, and your purpose. The transition can feel slow because healthy alignment often develops gradually. Meaningful connections are rarely formed through quick interactions or surface-level familiarity. They grow through shared understanding, mutual respect, and the recognition that two individuals are moving towards similar goals in life. When your path becomes clearer, the people who resonate with that clarity naturally become easier to recognize. The quiet season of isolation prepares you to recognize them when they appear. It sharpens your awareness of the qualities that truly matter in relationships. Patience, integrity, wisdom, and faith become more important than temporary excitement or social convenience. Over time, this clarity attracts individuals who share similar priorities. The relationships that form through this alignment often feel different from those that existed before. Conversations carry more depth. Encouragement becomes more genuine. The connection is not built on maintaining an image, but on supporting each other's growth. Isolation, in this sense, is not simply about being alone. It is about creating the conditions necessary for better alignment. The distance from previous environments allows your life to reorganize around purpose rather than habit. When that reorganization is complete, the relationships that appear next often reflect the direction you are now walking. Understanding this process changes how you interpret the season you are currently experiencing. What once felt like abandonment may reveal itself as preparation. What once felt like rejection may actually be protection from influences that would have slowed your growth. Isolation becomes less frightening when you recognize that it is not necessarily permanent. It is often the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. And once you understand that purpose, the way you experience the season itself begins to change. Chosen one. When you finally step back and look at the entire season of isolation from a wider perspective, the meaning of it often becomes clearer. What once felt like rejection begins revealing itself as preparation. The quiet distance from certain environments, the fading of relationships that once felt permanent, and the unexpected increase in time spent alone were not necessarily signs that something was wrong with your life. In many cases, they were signs that something was changing. Growth often requires space, and space rarely appears while life is crowded with constant interaction. When every moment is filled with noise, reflection becomes difficult. When attention is constantly divided among many voices, clarity struggles to form. Isolation interrupts that pattern. It creates the conditions necessary for recalibration. During these seasons, your direction becomes sharper because fewer influences are shaping your decisions. Your identity becomes stronger because it is no longer built on the expectations of the crowd. Instead of defining yourself through the roles you once held in certain environments, You begin discovering who you are when your life is guided by conviction rather than approval. This process is rarely comfortable. Human beings naturally seek connection, and distance from familiar relationships can feel unsettling at first. Yet, discomfort often accompanies transformation. The reason is simple. When God begins shaping someone for deeper purpose, the process requires change not only in circumstances, but also in character. Character grows through reflection, discipline, and patience. These qualities develop most effectively in environments where distractions are limited and focus becomes possible. The quiet seasons allow you to examine your life honestly. They allow you to identify patterns that once slowed your growth. They give you the opportunity to strengthen habits that align with your future, rather than repeating habits that belong to your past. What once appeared to be empty time becomes a period of construction happening beneath the surface. During this time, many chosen ones discover abilities and insights that were previously hidden beneath the noise of daily life. Creativity becomes stronger because the mind has room to think deeply. Faith becomes stronger because prayer becomes more intentional. Self-awareness becomes sharper because reflection replaces constant activity. These changes reshape your inner world in ways that eventually influence everything happening around you. By the time the season of isolation begins shifting, you are often not the same person who first entered it. Your priorities have changed. Your standards have grown stronger. Your ability to recognize healthy and unhealthy influences has become clearer. This transformation is the true purpose behind many seasons of separation. God's preparation often happens quietly and away from public attention. The world tends to celebrate visible achievements, but the qualities that sustain those achievements are usually developed in private. Patience, resilience, wisdom, and discernment grow during the moments when no one else is watching. Isolation provides the environment where those qualities can mature without the pressure of external expectations. Over time, the perspective you hold toward solitude begins shifting as well. Instead of interpreting it as loneliness, you begin recognizing it as space. Instead of feeling rejected by the absence of certain relationships, you begin appreciating the clarity that distance has created. This shift in perspective allows you to use the season more intentionally. You invest time in strengthening your faith, improving your skills, and refining the direction you want your life to follow. The quiet environment becomes a workshop where the next version of your life is being prepared. Eventually, the season of isolation begins changing again. New relationships appear that reflect the person you have become rather than the person you once were. Opportunities begin aligning with the direction that was clarified during the quiet time. The path forward becomes easier to recognize because your discernment has grown stronger. What once felt like separation reveals itself as alignment. The distance you experienced was not meant to leave you empty. It was meant to clear space for something more suitable to the direction your life was moving toward. When you understand this process, the narrative surrounding isolation changes completely. Instead of seeing it as punishment, you begin seeing it as preparation. Instead of interpreting it as abandonment, you recognize it as a form of protection, guiding you away from distractions that could have slowed your growth. Seasons of isolation may feel uncomfortable while you are walking through them, but they often create the conditions necessary for deeper transformation. What appears to be distance from others may actually be the space needed to strengthen your character, refine your direction, and prepare you for the responsibilities waiting ahead. And when the season finally shifts, you realize that the quiet time was not empty at all. It was the place where the foundation of your next chapter was quietly built. Before we finish, take a moment to reflect on this message. If you are in a season where life feels quieter and more isolated than before, remember that this does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes God creates distance so clarity, strength, and direction can grow without distraction. If this message resonated with your journey,
Consider liking the video so it can reach others who may be experiencing the same season.
You can also share it with someone who needs encouragement right now. And if you want more content about the journey of the chosen ones, spiritual growth, and God's preparation seasons, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next message. Stay faithful and trust the process God is guiding you through.